descriptor, although it sounds like it kind of is critical somehow, is actually far more accurate than we might realise. From 1870 in the Forced Education Act, school classrooms for the masses, for the working classes, were literally set up for people to be treated as kind of little soldiers and to operate even like practical activities from behind their desks in rows, to do as they're told, to develop conformity. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. It's the background of our teaching structures. Now, what we want to look at is the more modern kind of era. What does the rank and file classroom setup mean, and why should we use it? First of all, the teacher's going to be at the front of this space in almost all cases. There will be some examples. We will find our students are in rows. Okay, they are in rows. We can call these in the ranks, obviously. We will find that the students are facing forwards. Obviously, we've got a couple that are on the side here, kind of facing at an angle, but students will be facing forward. And as I've mentioned in at least one of the tutorials that I've done before, you can, let me do this in a different colour, you can describe this as the cinema style classroom. And the idea of this is that a broadcast is probably being done. The teacher is probably doing some kind of presentation from the front of the class. I've heard lots of analogies of this in the past, but the idea is that this is very much set up like a cinema, although the light's not turned out. Although often when we put our projector in play, maybe they are. But anyway, I won't get back to that. So quite literally kind of a cinema style setup. Now what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to evaluate this classroom. In green, what are the positives? In red in the moment, what are the negatives of this? Well, first of all, I think we've got to say that this is a real comfort zone for teachers on average. So, this is very much a go-to sort of space for teachers to set their classrooms up and PTs. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Sort of having comfort and familiarity obviously can be a good thing. We could also say that it's relatively controlled. Okay, so ideas of like classroom management and conformity and discipline are probably easier to achieve here. I would just say it develops conformity. So there's a conformist sort of mentality to this classroom. And again, that can be seen very, very positively, especially in an institutional classroom kind of environment. We also get what we might describe as space efficiency. You're going to see some other examples maybe where we've got less efficiency, but basically, folks, we can get about up to 30 students in that space, given the average classroom, given the average sort of tendency for one adult teacher to control that sort of space. We've also got the fact that teacher faces. So if I just put here teacher faces all students, that's another way of putting that. The teacher can actually look into the eyes of all students. That's a positive. We can also say in here that seating plans are simple. If you think about this, if you've got to develop a seating plan here, really what you're asking yourself is who should someone sit next to, or who are the two people that someone should next to, kind of the extent of what you're considering. And another strength of this is it's good for transmission. Okay, what I mean by that is if the objective of your classroom is to stand at the front and to broadcast, transmit information, this is going to work, okay, at least to the extent that that classroom model can work, okay? So that's going to be where you probably go towards that. Now, there are some negatives. Remember, negatives are in red. It definitely limits group work. So you'll find generally that when you do group work in a space like this, there's lots of straining, moving around, possibly moving desks, which is fine, by the way. We also get the segregation of spaces, which might not sound like a very important thing when you first say it. But one of the things this classroom does, perhaps annoyingly, is it makes this bespokely the teacher space, this bespokely the student space, and generally neither will cross into the other. Now, of course, there's some exceptions to that, and people, the teacher will at times find themselves over here talking to a student, for example, but that's actually quite a challenging higher level skill. So we get quite literal segregation of the space. And also notice that this student here is very infrequently coming up to this space, even if there is an air quote interactive whiteboard, or a name for something like that, that's up the front there. It's not good for collaborative structures. So I'm talking about the Kagan structures there. I've done lots of things on this in the question technique lessons. I encourage you to go and have a look at those. So collaborative structures will not work well in this space, or will not be natural in this kind of space. Do see the question technique courses for that. Also, can I say it's often an assumption? And again, I don't think I literally would encourage it, but what would encourage you to do this? But what would do if you walked around your school or your college and you saw this in a large proportion of the classrooms? And maybe you wouldn't, but let's say you did. and you ask the teacher, why is it structured like that? What would they tell you specifically? What would be the learning reasons? And I think a lot of the time it's an assumption. It creates a lot of hidden spaces. So if you think that, for example, this block of space here is quite hidden from the teacher, okay, that's quite a sort of a secluded spot, and dark things can maybe happen in there. We also find that one-to-one is limited. One-to-one is limited because of the nature of everybody sort of facing forward. It doesn't really sort of present itself in that kind of classroom. And the biggest one I want to say to you is that classroom, in my opinion, creates a them and us sense to the room. Now, obviously, there can be loads of exceptions to that, but by structure, we've got that segregation of spaces and a them and us sort of structure or sense. Now, again, brilliant. Teachers will get over that, of course they will. But by design, by structure, perhaps that's what it is. So what would we say in summary of this? Well, I would say probably if your intention is to do a transmission and your intention is to have a controlled environment, probably this is the space for you. But does that necessarily cause the maximum learning possible in all situations? Maybe not. So at least we can challenge the idea.